A common sight during this time of year, standing proudly and shining bright in between the fallen leaves and descending darkness, is the mascot of Halloween itself, the jack-o'-lantern. It's the product of hollowing out a pumpkin and then carve out a most diabolical face. Completed, of course, with a lit candle inside the vacant gourd, because what is Halloween without a little fire hazard? It's easily the most recognizable symbol for the season, but why is it? Today we dive headfirst into a deep, dark and interesting rabbit hole as to what a jack-o'-lantern actually is, where it came from, and how its fundamental connection to the holiday of Halloween arose and got stuck in the tradition. In order to answer that, we must also examine how Halloween came to be from the very beginning of the holiday through the oceans of times until we make port back at the present. But first, we must answer this question: who actually is Jack-o'-lantern? Now, Stingy Jack, better known by the name of Jack-o'-lantern, short for Jack of the Lantern, stems from a folktale from Ireland. As it often is with folktales, the origin of when it was first told, or even how the original version went, are in this case lost to time, since it was changed by being shared and kept alive primarily by verbal exchange. Even the written accounts of the tale tend to differ in versions. But to get to know and fully understand this Halloween mascot, we must first learn of who he was and how he came to be. Presented now is an amalgamation consisting of the most common versions for this old Irish tale, the story of Jack-o'-lantern. He was known by many names: John, Jack, Stingy, and even Blacksmith by some folks. But what we know for sure of him was that his heart grimaced with joy when he would hustle, steal, prank, or drink. It even came to a point where Jack was considered so devious that the devil himself took interest in claiming his immortal soul. Jack was having a drink, as he so often was, when the devil approached him. "You must come with me now, Jack. Your soul belongs in hell," the devil said. Jack looked down into his drink and saw his own sorry mark in the reflection. He considered his options, and with a sly grin he asked the devil, "If it shall be, so it must. But I beg, before my soul goes into damnation, let a lad have a drink for the road." The devil admired Jack's desire for sinning a final time, but a problem arose. Neither of them carried any coin. But Jack already had a plan. He told the devil to transform into a coin so that he could pay the bartender with it, and when no one was looking, simply transform back. The devil were elated for this monetary mockery, and so quickly shapeshifted into a shiny bright coin. However, Jack had another plan in mind. He grabbed that shiny devil dosh and threw it into his pocket where, that just happened to be, a shiny cross he had stolen from a church earlier that night. The devil was fuming and could not believe that the all-father of trickery had himself been made a fool. He struggled to get out, but the power of the shiny lowercase t near him was overwhelming. "Fine," said the devil. "What is it that you want?" Jack looked into his pocket and proudly exclaimed, "Listen up, devil. I'm not done drinking, gambling or ripping people off yet. Hell, I enjoy it and I simply want more. I am not an unreasonable man though. 10 more years is all I ask, then I shall be yours." The devil, always one to make a deal, agreed to the terms which Jack had presented. Jack reached into his pocket, removed the cross, and the devil vanished. "10 years went on to pass, and Jack, like a train with broken brakes, was still on the same track with no stopping in sight. Jack was walking home through the woods when the devil suddenly appeared. The devil seemed to be in a good mood, as it was finally time to harvest this rotten soul. But Jack seemed disinterested in the demon in front of him. It appeared that he was looking not at the devil, but something else behind the all-father of evil. The devil rolled his eyes and with hands on hips sighed and exclaimed, "Ugh! What is it now? Spit it out." "Mr. Devil," said Jack, almost mockingly humble, "oh, if only I could beg you for one final thing. For a poor man, before he must suffer for eternity. Oh, I beg you. If only I could have that deliciously juicy apple from the tree top. Nothing more, and I promise I'll go along as you please." The devil looked at the apple at the top of the tree behind him. A slight hint of nostalgia fell upon him as he reminisced on his younger days as a snake in that marvellous garden. Maybe it was one for the old days, maybe it was to finally get Jack to go with him, but whatever happened inside the demon, he acquiesced to the request. The devil climbed up into the tree, but as soon as he reached the apple, he noticed something. He was unable to move. Now, stories tend to differ here, but it would seem that to trap the demon, Jack had either carved a cross into the tree trunk beneath the devil, or he had placed a dozen silver crosses around the tree set up like headstones, preventing the devil from descending it. The devil, angered by this blatant array of arrogant ingeniousness, placing him once more as a devil in distress, asked Jack what he would require to let him go. Jack did not wish for any mortal pleasures this time, but ensured his eternal fate instead.
Listen up. For all the rotten things I've done, and for all the rotten things I'll eventually do, you must ensure and guarantee that you shall never take my soul to be yours.
The devil reluctantly agreed, and Jack released him from this wooden trap. Now, Jack's not really a man of change, and he went on to continue doing all the things he did before, drinking, stealing, eating gluttonously and whoring around. And in the end, as it so often does, it caught up to his mortal body, as his liver gave out right there on the streets after leaving the pub for the last time. Jack was lying there on the cobblestones for a while, contemplating what would happen now. He was surely meant for hell. Jack was after all a man with a bit of self-realization, but he reckoned he could talk St. Peter into opening those lovely pearly gates and let him through. After all, he had tricked the old father of trickery twice already. How much of a challenge could the goody two-shoes of God really be? As his soul ascended to heaven for judgment, he saw the look on St. Peter's face, and it wasn't friendly. St. Peter exclaimed that Jack had no place in heaven and sent him directly down to hell. And here Jack arrived at the flaming gates, where he once again laid eyes on the devil himself. Jack may have thought that the devil and him could have had a laugh about the whole situation. Oh, what fun and silly they'd been together. What great stories to tell at dinner parties. Surely Satan will be elated to once again see him. But Satan was not. The devil saw Jack and at once grew maliciously cheery, with an evil spark in his eye. He mocked Jack for being dead already, and had a grand laugh at him dying alone in the streets. Jack, humbled by this reception, unwillingly asked if he could enter hell, as heaven would not accept him. The devil paused, observed Jack for a second, for the gall to even ask such a thing. He smiled with an evil grin and said, "No, Jack. No, I simply can't. Remember, we have a deal. I promised that I shall never take your soul to be mine, and so it shall be." And with those parting words, Jack was doomed to spend all eternity not in heaven nor in hell. He was condemned to spend the rest of all time wandering aimlessly as a ghost on earth. Now Jack had to find his way back to the village somehow in the over-encumbering darkness of oblivion, and therefore asked Satan for one last thing, a light, so to shine through the darkness. Satan reluctantly obliged and flicked a bit of hellfire towards him, and to the devil's amusement, this scorched Jack's hand. Unable to carry it in his palms, Jack had to find a lamp-like vessel to transport this fiery light source. Jack hurried and hollowed out a turnip that he had stolen earlier, and placed the flame inside it. And so, turnip in hand with hellfire for light, he began to roam the earth as a ghost, and to this day he wanders the endless darkness, just like all other lost souls, for all eternity. Now, we can of course see the hints about how this may be connected to Halloween as we know it. Trickery, ghost, devils and candle-infused gourds. But none of it has a direct correlation with Halloween to a satisfactory degree. It really doesn't explain anything about carving pumpkins, Halloween, or anything we know of jack-o'-lantern from today. So, how did we get there? Cast your minds back to about 5,000 years ago in a place known as Terrascrine Valley, a bit northwest of Dublin in Ireland. In that place we find a few man-made hills called the Mound of the Hostages, built by the Indo-European people and quite possibly later modified by the Celts. The mounds have a magnificent function, which is that the entrance into these hills, specifically the Hill of Flatca, aligns perfectly with the rising sun around the end of October. This would suggest that they are built for ritualistic purposes, specifically for a ritual concerning this time of the year. Now, October means a lot of things to a lot of people, but mostly for the Indo-European people, it meant the end of their agricultural cycle, the last crops before winter. This is quite a significant time period, as it for them meant that it was time to take stock of what you could save and ration for the winter before it was too late and too cold to do such a thing. It's quite possible that they would make a tradition of celebrating the ending of the agriculture year to create a more positive view of the winter times which were quickly approaching. We are at least certainly aware that the ancient Celtic people of Ireland were doing exactly such a thing. Let's fast forward a bit to around the year 500 BCE, where we see the people known as the Celts in full flare celebrating their tradition called Samhain. Samhain was a sort of proto-Halloween, and you'll soon see why as we go over the familiar ways of the tradition. The Celts held a belief that on the night of October 31, the veil between our world and that of the monsters would be at its thinnest and therefore easiest to go past and cross through. Their reasoning for this may have been due to the transitional period they found themselves in, from leaving the warm and comfortable summer period and going into the cold winter nights ahead, which would symbolize the passing of the warm habitable summer, symbolized as our world, and the cold harsh winter, symbolizing the other world as they called it. Known by many names, the other world is where the spirits, the dead and the fae reside. Since darkness would soon fall over the earth for a handful of months, the transitional period going into winter would be the best opportunities for the fae and spirits to cross the veil and walk amongst the living. The sun as well would now go into a darkened state, only visiting the overworld where the humans lived for a shortened time every day, as the days would grow shorter and shorter due to the northern hemisphere gradually leaning away from the sun in those months. Even though the Celts had a somewhat rudimentary understanding of the movement of the sun and moon, they would still craft up a more mythological explanation to this phenomena. It was in their understanding that the fading sun must mean that whilst they were covered in darkness, and the sun resided beneath them, since it, from their point of view, would drop beneath the earth, it would instead shine on the underworld where the Lord of the Dead resided. Since the sun would now spend more time in the realm of the dead, they instead could harness the power of the sun, and they would therefore be able to cross the veil and gather on earth to roam and haunt, leaving the humans vulnerable in their cold and darkened state during the winter months. So to help the sun as much as they humanly could and protect themselves to the best of their ability, they would light candles, burn wood and build great fires to replicate the sun's warmth and light as much as they were able to. The Hill of Flatca specifically was the location where the Celts built a massive bonfire to celebrate the eve of Samhain. Sources say that they would also throw in animal bones into the fire pit, perhaps as a sacrifice to their gods, or as formerly mentioned, to grant power to the fading sun. As this would be the closest man could come to replicate the power of the sun for themselves, they believed that this would be able to hold the spirits at bay and grant themselves safety in the approaching darkness. However, fire would not be enough to ensure your safety amongst the wandering spirits. This is why the Celts would also adorn themselves in animal skins and headgear and masks as well made by the skulls, in order to hide their identity from the wandering ghosts among them. But alas, this would not be a foolproof method for your mortal protection, as ghosts would sometimes be able to see through your disguise, given the chance that you came near them enough. The Celts would therefore also take extra precaution to avoid crossroads, bridges and similar places, as they believed that these would be locations where ghosts and spirits would be drawn to, since it reminded them of the bridge or crossroad they would have passed through when crossing the veil to the human world. This is why during Samhain you should only walk the streets you know, and remember to carry a light and never go near bridges or crossroads. If you were unable to disguise yourself, however, it was highly advisable to stay inside your homes in the comfort of a candle or a fire. Some sources even tell you to go to bed early that night, as spirits appear to have less interest in you if you're sleeping rather than if you were nervously scattering about. Now, in the comfort of your own home, before you take that unrestful sleep during Samhain night, be sure to set out something to eat for your ancestors outside your door. You see, not all ghosts are malicious, as some of them may be from your previous family members. These ghosts are kind spirits, just seeking comfort near their kins for the warmth of a candle and a small helping of food. This is why, later in the night, when all is quiet and the bonfire is lit, people would place a small covered candle outside their homes so the spirit of their family could find the way towards them. Next to the covered candle would be a small portion of food meant for the deceased member of the family tribe. But make sure that the food that you serve is actually proper and not just the fat and bones from your meal of yesterday. If you don't dish up something good, the visiting ancestors may turn from a kind visitor into an angry ghoul and attack your household. The Celts believe in quality assurance for your offering to the ancestors was not only based on the love you must show to your deceased, but also on the fear of the power that these spirits held. You see, if the spirits were left unhappy with the offering during this time, they would turn from benevolent and loving into frantic, angry ghouls and wreak havoc upon your home and family. Bad luck would descend upon you for at least a year. Something in your home would break, something bad would happen to your family members, along those lines. So if you want your house intact, no spirits angered, you better not be stingy on your soul servings. Sources differ on this point, but some claim that all the food left uneaten would be given to the poor people in town after a while. And considering that ghosts are most often not completely corporeal enough to grab a knife and fork, one must imagine that this time would be a feast for the lower class of the village. Now, regarding that candle that you leave outside your home, placing it just as such would soon become an unfruitful endeavour, as the cold October night would have that fragile little flame snuffed within a few seconds. But the Celts were resourceful folk. Instead of leaving out a naked candle defenceless in the cold autumn night, they would hollow out a gourd, such as a turnip, as these were readily available during this time of year in Ireland, and place the candle inside of it, as a sort of makeshift lantern to cover the flame from the biting wind. But the light from the living flame in front of your home may attract some unwanted attention of the undead kind. So, some sources say, the Celts would carve scary faces on the front of the gourd to scare away unwanted visitors. Now, in theory, these malicious-looking engravings would only deter ghosts that were unfamiliar to the families, and not the ancestral spirits themselves. Possibly due to the imprinted energy left in the gourd from the intentions of the carver. This would also serve a practical purpose, however, as more elaborate carvings on the front of the gourd, instead of just a big hole, would help cover the flame from wayward winds. So, to summarize, as long as you disguised yourself if you were to walk the streets, left out offerings of food for the deceased that may visit, left a light outside your home to welcome the kind souls, but made sure that that light was unfriendly enough to scare away the unwanted spirits, you should be fine to survive the night of Samhain through many more winters to come. But we don't call it Samhain, we call it Halloween. Why did the name so drastically change? Well, to answer that, as with most things, we must look to how Christianity involved itself without invitation and simply stole the holiday for their own amusement. Around the year 450 AD, we find the Roman Empire spreading across Europe like an oil spill in the ocean. They soon made their way towards Ireland and thereabout, where they met the Celts and learned of their wonderfully interesting traditions, or, as they saw it, filthy pagan ways. This excursion was prompted by Pope Boniface VIII, with a plan of wholeheartedly convincing these heathens that their gods were wrong and the gods of the Roman Empire were correct. They kindly asked the Celts to cease their nonsensical rituals and instead use that little bonfire for something else. Say, maybe use it on May 13 instead, where a Christian holiday known as All Saints' Day was celebrated. Oh, and of course, stop this play pretend with silly souls and monsters, and instead decreed a celebration towards the saints and martyrs. The Celts, however, didn't really see the point of this. After a not-so-friendly response from the Celts, the Romans left the premises and wandered home to ponder a plan of action. Going forward a bit to around the year 700 AD, Pope Gregory III came up with a plan. He suggested, how about we move All Saints' Day, where we honor all the saints of the past, and maybe just make up a new holiday, All Souls' Day, where we celebrate all the people we've lost and loved. And hey, let's just move them to, I don't know, right on top of their little pagan ritual, yeah? Maybe November 1st and 2nd? This sounded like a brilliant plan to the holy troop of the Roman Empire, and they proudly returned to the Celts with this fresh and saintly idea. The Roman troops were awfully convincing this time, using a strategy known as, we believe we have the moral and religious high ground, and we also outnumber you with better weapons, which we won't hesitate in using and killing you in the loving name of Christ. With little to no choice, the Celts agreed to go along with the changes. Samhain was now considered a Christian holiday, as it would be dedicated to saints and Christian souls of yore instead of spooky fae and wandering ghosts. In the makeover, it would also receive a new name, now being referred to as the evening before All Saints' Day, which later changed to the evening of All Hallows' Day, which later changed to All Hallows' Eve, from which we get the shortened version we know today, Halloween. However, that's only an explanation as to why Samhain, the beloved Celtic tradition, changed its name to be considered approved and holy by Christianity. And if we take a look at the map, we'll see that Ireland is a tad far away from America, where Halloween is most celebrated in comparison to about every other country in the world. So how did that happen? Well, as it most often is with fun traditions, exciting culture and good food, you have the immigrants to thank. You see, the Irish was forced to immigrate to America in great numbers from the mid-1700s to about the beginning of the 1900s. This was due to a lot of factors, most commonly necessitated by famine, war, or religious conflicts. This meant that even though Halloween was originally only practiced in small Irish Catholic settlements, it would be carried over to the New World during this relocation of the Irish people. As America welcomed a whole lot of immigrants, it also welcomed the integration of their native traditions. And so, as time went by, the immigrants became loud and proud Americans, and their beloved Samhain became a USA certified Yeehaw Halloween tradition instead. With America's influence in the modern time through basically all different media such as radio, television, and certainly the internet, it's no surprise that their way of life and their traditions are slowly integrating into countries far across the waters. Given that the Roman Empire did their fair share of hard work, lovingly convincing every other country they visited to share in the Christian views and traditions, the groundwork for embracing Halloween was already laid in Europe, so it didn't take much convincing for most countries to embrace and accept the modern version of the tradition when it was reintroduced to them. Okay, so far so great. We've learned how Halloween came to America and how the rest of us got infected with the Samhain 2.0 celebration. But I still don't understand why I have to be bothered in the middle of my horror flick in this lovely autumn evening by beggars outside my door. Also, why are people throwing toilet paper on my home? And who are all those kids dressed up as monsters outside? So as explained in the earlier sections of this telling, the Celts were known to adorn the skins and skulls of animals during Samhain in order to hide themselves from the evil spirits who would cross the veil and wander aimlessly amongst them. But to appease the specific spirits whom they actually wanted to approach, that being their ancestors, they would leave out an item of food for them, either by the door or by their table. This ritual would continue to evolve throughout the years, staying somewhat true to the original concept. You see, in the Middle Ages, there'd be an emergence of so-called soulless. These people, consisting primarily of children and sometimes the very poor adults, would dress up in disguises and go door to door on a quest for either food, money, or an especially delectable treat known as a soul cake. These delightful little snacks would be a round, small, cake-ish treat, often served with an indentation of a cross on the top of it. This marking of the cross would represent the soul being freed as soon as the cake were eaten, and as the cakes were commonly made with cinnamon, nutmeg and raisins, it would be a rather sweet little thing compared to the common folks' normal diets. The soulless would knock on the door, and upon the homeowner's emergence from the house, they would begin praying or even singing towards them. This was meant as an act of blessing the family, the home itself and the souls of the lost family members. This performance would be very similar to what we know today as Christmas carolers. Once the pray session was completed, they would be handed a treat and they'd be on to the next house. But it wasn't always this simple of a transaction, as not all homes were equally as welcoming to unsolicited soulless, so they would either slam the door once they laid eyes on the disguised a cappella group, and sometimes they wouldn't even leave their chairs. This would mark the emergence of the vindictive custom crowd, as they would retaliate for not receiving adequate treats for their appearance and willingness to perform. These unsatiated soulless would seek vengeance in a plethora of ways, such as destroying something on the house, wishing bad luck on the homeowner, or marking the house as rotten for the other soulless to come. All in all, they would make life for the unwelcoming occupant worse to a certain degree. This tradition of disguising yourself whilst going house to house for a small offering would slowly and steadily develop into the well-known Halloween performance of Trick or Treat, where kids would dress up in costumes and walk around the neighborhood expecting candy from the different residents. And as it were with the soulless of yesteryear, if no treats were given, the homeowner could expect himself to be tricked in a manner of ways, most often with toilet paper covering their houses. So to summarize, people would dress up, originally to hide from the ghosts, and then they would go door to door to imitate the wandering spirits, taking part in a metaphorical offering of food left out for the dead, and recreate what would happen if the homeowner should forget to leave out a satisfactory treat. But that still doesn't explain the thing that stands proudly next to the bowl of candy, this big orange gourd shining bright with a big grin in the darkness. What exactly does Halloween have to do with the jack-o'-lantern? No pumpkins have yet to be mentioned, and should we glance at almost any representation of the jack-o'-lantern today, we sure won't find many turnips displaying a face carved into it. What is up with the spooky smiling pumpkin? You'd think that the Celts of old would have preferred a nice plum pumpkin ripe for a big carving of spooky faces into it, rather than a tough little turnip, right? Well, it simply wouldn't have been possible. You see, back in Ireland, during the time of Samhain and, well, any other time of the year actually, there'd be no pumpkin in sight, no matter where you looked. This is due to the simple reason that pumpkins aren't native to Ireland and actually weren't grown anywhere in Europe before at least the late 1600s, when they were shipped to the different parts of the continent. But where were these pumpkins shipped from exactly? Well, nowhere else but a certain Halloween-loving country, America. And America is exactly where the story takes us, because you see, as the Irish were forced to leave their country and immigrate to the New World, they would, as mentioned earlier, also bring their traditions of Samhain, or as it was called at this point, Halloween, along with them on the journey. But a problem arose. You see, there were few, if any, turnips to be found in this new country, and October were quickly approaching. A gourd must be carved within time, but without their normal harvest, they'd be stranded with no hollow turnip to face and scare the soon approaching aimless spirits. But it just so happens that the American harvest season matched up closely with the one that the Irish were used to, and though no common European gourd was to be found, they had spotted another one instead. A big, proud, round gourd, perfect for an impromptu lantern. None else than the pumpkin. To the benefit of the Halloween developing people, due to its size and more penetratable skin, the pumpkin was quite an upgrade in ease of carving and sculpting. So with the necessity of a carved gourd approaching, and faced with this new improved option, the Irish switched over to use the pumpkins instead. And so did the rest of the world, slowly but steadily, as the pumpkin was distributed from its native soil to strange new lands. And so with a new gourd at hand, but the same old technique and intentions, the homeowners could once again be safe from the aimless spirits during Halloween night, as the front door stood protected by an eerily smiling pumpkin with a twinkle of fire from its eyes. Now yes, that's all very well. We've learned the roots of Halloween, how it turned from pagan to Christian, how it spread to new countries through various means, and even how the pumpkin got introduced. But what about Jack-o'-lantern himself? The legend of Stingy Jack, the mascot of Halloween itself. The reason the holiday even exists. How did Halloween arise from the legend of Jack-o'-lantern? Well, that's the fun part. It didn't. It's the other way around. You see, the legend of Jack-o'-lantern, formerly known as Stingy Jack, arose from the traditions of Samhain which survived through the Middle Ages. We can do some sort of carbon dating to the story's age to be created around the year 700 or 800 at the earliest, when pubs were beginning to become a common thing. The pub, and when such a thing came about, is a major clue to the age of the tale, as it acts as a common narrative setting and location for the majority of Jack's story. This would indicate that the story itself was created a long time after the creation of Samhain, maybe even after the tradition had a name change to instead be called Halloween. Jack-o'-lantern, the folktale, and the story of this specific person, was therefore not the genesis of the tradition, but rather an exciting product created from it. The story itself is based on the concepts and ancient beliefs in the soul, the afterlives, and ghosts, intertwined with the different superstitions on how you may protect yourself from them. The way Jack is forced to walk the realm between living and dead is inspired by the veil from our world and that of the dead, which opens on the eve of Halloween. The gourd he carries is inspired by the different gourds the Celts of old would make to light their way into darkness for familiar souls to find their way home, and to scare away the malicious ones. These common beliefs and ancient pagan traditions are the foundations for the creation of the tale, not the other way around. Lastly, another possible explanation for the creation of the folktale is the natural phenomena often referred to as jack-o'-lanterns, that being nothing less but luminous gas, or in more scientific terms, flaming swamp farts. You see, the natural occurrence of floating jack-o'-lanterns, also known as will-o'-the-wisp or ignis fatuus, are small floating lights which most often occur around wetlands and swamp areas and marshlands and such. These specks of spectral light are created by methane gases emitted from the different elements in the ground, which on rare occasions combust into tiny flames in the air. These gases doesn't even have to be set alight by external sources, as the swamp itself contains all the ingredients to create the floating phantoms. The swamp emits chemicals called diphosphane and phosphine, which joins and mixes with each other in such a rapid fashion that it will spontaneously ignite on contact with the oxygen in the air. Given that swamp-like places are constantly full of methane gas due to the enlarged carbon reserves fueling the methane-producing microbes, it's no wonder that sudden natural occurring sparks will ignite small portions of the floating gases, making small light shows which have confounded humans for several centuries. And sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes a little spark on a swamp fart, observed by a human who cannot fathom how such a thing could occur, is enough to fuel their brain to construct tales upon tales on what they saw and how it worked. That's how we created mythology, folk tales, and even simple stories that we tell our kids so they won't go too far into the woods. The tradition of Halloween has been kept alive because of this very concept.
our intrigue into the unknown, the scary, the macabre, our innate desire to know and understand what lies beyond our comprehension, to become as wise as those who walked before us, even though we may actually know more now than they themselves could ever learn. Well, that, and then maybe it's just because we like to dress up and eat candy. Either or.